James Carter, 38, had the kind of life most people only dreamed about. From his sleek penthouse in Chicago's Gold Coast, he could see Lake Michigan shimmering under the city's skyline, a view that screamed success. His real estate empire, built from scratch, had made him a millionaire by 30. His garage housed a Tesla Model S, always charged and ready, and his closet was a parade of tailored suits from Milan. But Jim, as his friends called him, didn't measure his wealth in dollars. His real treasure was Emily Harper, his 32-year-old fiancée, whose laugh could cut through the noise of even the busiest day. Every morning, Jim woke up to Emily's soft humming as she brewed coffee in their open-plan kitchen. The smell of roasted beans mixed with the faint scent of her lavender shampoo, grounding him in a way nothing else could. Why me?" he'd ask, leaning against the counter, his broad frame taking up space. She'd roll her eyes, her hazel gaze sparkling. "You're my safe place, Jim. Big heart, bigger hugs." He'd chuckle, patting his stomach. "Big, huh? You mean this dad bod I'm rocking?" Emily would just smile, her voice soft but sure. "I love all of you, every single inch." Their life wasn't perfect, but it was close. Weekends were for lazy brunches at the Bongo Room or strolls through Millennium Park, where Emily sketched strangers and Jim pretended to understand modern art. They'd talk about everything, her latest graphic design project, his next property deal, or just the way the city lights danced on the water at night. But beneath the surface, Jim carried a quiet question that had haunted him since childhood. Can anyone love me for me? Not what I've built? Growing up on Chicago's South Side, Jim wasn't always the guy with the corner office. He was the chubby kid in hand-me-downs, the one kids called Big Jim with a sneer. School was brutal, classmates mocked his size, and gym class was a nightmare. "You're too slow for basketball," the coach would say, benching him every game. Jim found refuge in books, first comic books about underdog heroes, then library copies of Rich Dad Poor Dad. While other kids traded Pokemon cards, Jim was scribbling business ideas in a spiral notebook. By 16, he was mowing lawns and saving every penny. By 25, he'd flipped his first fixer-upper, a crumbling two-flat in Englewood. Each deal was a brick in the wall he built around his heart, protecting himself from the world's judgment. Emily was different, or so he thought. She didn't care about his bank account or his name on the lease. She teased him about his obsession with stock market apps but never asked for a dime. When he surprised her with a weekend in Paris, she spent more time sketching street artists than shopping on the Champs-Élysées. "You're enough, Jim," she'd say, and he wanted to believe her. But old insecurities die hard, and sometimes, late at night, he'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if her love was too good to be true. One October evening, Jim sat alone at Celeste, a trendy rooftop spot in River North. Emily was home with a cold, and he'd promised to bring her favorite takeout, truffle fries and a kale salad she swore tasted better than it sounded. The restaurant buzzed with Chicago's elite, tech bros in Patagonia vests, influencers snapping selfies, and couples clinking wine glasses. Jim, in his navy blazer, blended in but felt out of place. He scrolled through emails, waiting for the order, when he felt a tug at his shoe. His first thought was a stray napkin or maybe a curious pigeon. But then it came again, deliberate, human. He leaned down, peering under the table, and froze. A boy, maybe 10, stared back at him. His messy brown hair stuck out from a faded Cubs hoodie, and his green eyes were sharp, almost too old for his face. "Hey, mister," the kid whispered. "Got any food?" Jim's heart thudded. The boy's clothes were worn, his sneakers mismatched, but his voice was steady, like he'd asked this question 100 times. Jim glanced around. No one noticed. He slid his untouched plate of steak frites under the table. "Eat slow, kid. Don't get caught." The boy, who mumbled his name was Lucas, tore into the food with quiet precision, like he knew exactly how to make it last. Jim watched, a mix of pity and curiosity swirling in his chest. "You got family?" he asked softly. Lucas paused, a fry halfway to his mouth. "Just my grandma. She's sick." Before Jim could press, Lucas grabbed a dinner roll, stuffed it in his pocket, and slipped away, vanishing into the alley beyond the restaurant's glass walls. Jim sat there, the city's hum fading to static. He paid the bill, left a $100 tip, and stepped into the chilly night, scanning the shadows for Lucas. The kid was gone, but those green eyes lingered, a spark that wouldn't let Jim go back to his perfect life just yet. The Chicago wind bit harder the next evening as James Carter pulled his coat tighter, stepping out of his Tesla onto the glowing streets of River North. The encounter with Lucas, the boy under the table at Celeste, had left a mark Jim couldn't shake. Those green eyes, sharp and weary, followed him into his dreams, stirring something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt, maybe, or a need to fix what he hadn't broken. He'd spent the day distracted, his usual laser focus on property deals dulled by the memory of Lucas's quiet hunger. Now, he was back at the restaurant, hoping for a glimpse of the kid, a chance to do something. Inside Celeste, the same elite crowd buzzed. Tech entrepreneurs pitching startups, couples lost in overpriced wine. Jim took his usual corner table, ordered a coffee, and scanned the room. No Lucas. The polished hardwood floor gleamed under the chandeliers, but the space beneath the tables was empty. He flagged down Miguel, the waiter from last night, a lanky guy with nervous eyes and a name tag slightly askew. "Hey, Miguel," Jim said, keeping his voice low. "That kid from yesterday, seen him around?" Miguel shifted, glancing over his shoulder. "The one under your table?" "Yeah, he pops up sometimes. Scrounges for scraps when the staff's not looking." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Look, man, I shouldn't say this, but he lives in Pilsen, some rundown place with his grandma. She's not doing great." Jim slid a $50 bill across the table, his expression firm. "Give me an address." Discreetly, Miguel pocketed the cash with a quick nod. "Give me a day." Jim left the restaurant, the city's pulse thrumming in his ears. He drove home to his Gold Coast penthouse, where Emily was curled up on the couch, a sketchpad on her lap. Her hair was in a messy bun, and she wore one of Jim's old Northwestern hoodies, looking more like a college student than a graphic designer with a rising portfolio. "You're late," she teased, glancing up. "Big deal goes south." Jim forced a smile, dropping his keys on the counter. "Just a long day." He wanted to tell her about Lucas, but something stopped him. Maybe the way her eyes flicked to her phone, which buzzed twice before she silenced it. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone softer now. Jim nodded, but his gut churned. Emily's phone buzzed again, and she flipped it face down a little too quickly. "Work stuff," she said, her smile tight. Jim didn't push, but the air felt heavier, like the moment before a storm. They ate dinner, takeout from Lou Malnati's, her favorite deep dish pizza. But the conversation was stilted. Emily talked about a new client. Her words clipped, and Jim barely listened, his mind on Lucas's mismatched sneakers and that roll stuffed in his pocket. The next morning, Jim woke to find Emily already gone, a post-it on the fridge. Asterisk early meeting, back by lunch. "Love you." Asterisk he stared at the note, her loopy handwriting familiar, but suddenly foreign. Shaking it off, he headed to his office downtown, a glass-walled space overlooking the loop. But work felt hollow. Emails piled up, his assistant buzzed about a zoning issue, and all Jim could think about was Lucas. By noon, Miguel texted an address, a crumbling apartment building in Pilsen, just off 18th Street. Jim didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and drove, the city blurring past. Pilsen was a different world from the Gold Coast. Vibrant murals splashed across brick walls to carry a spilling salsa-scented steam, but also pockets of decay. The address led to a sagging 3-story building, its fire escape rusted and windows patched with cardboard. Jim knocked, then pushed the unlocked door open. The air inside was thick with mildew and the faint tang of medicine. In a dim corner, on a cot piled with threadbare blankets, lay an elderly woman, her breathing shallow. Lucas sat beside her, his small hands clutching hers. He looked up, unsurprised. "You came," he said, his voice flat. "Too late, though? Grandma's barely waking up." Jim's chest tightened. "She needs a doctor. Now." He dialed 911, his voice steady as he gave the address. Lucas watched, his green eyes unreadable. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "Nobody else does." Jim knelt beside him. "I'm here, Lucas. That's what matters." Paramedics arrived, their radios crackling, and whisked the woman, Margaret, Lucas called her, to the hospital. Jim followed, Lucas in the passenger seat, silent but clutching the roll from Celeste like a lifeline. At the hospital, Jim paid for Margaret's initial care, ignoring the nurse's raised eyebrow at his credit card. Lucas stayed close, his trust fragile but growing. "She's all I got," he whispered as they sat in the waiting room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Jim nodded, but a question burned. Why was Lucas alone? And then, unbidden, another thought. Those green eyes looked eerily like Emily's when she was tired, that same sharp intensity. That night, back at the penthouse, Emily was home, sketching again. But her movements were tense, her smile strained. "Rough day?" Jim asked, watching her closely. She shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Just client drama." Her phone lit up again, and she swiped it away. Jim's unease grew, a knot tightening in his stomach. He didn't know what Emily was hiding, but Lucas's face and those eyes kept pulling him toward a truth he wasn't ready to face. The Chicago skyline glittered outside Jim Carter's penthouse, but inside, the air felt stifling. It had been 3 days since he'd found Lucas in that crumbling Pilsen apartment, 3 days since he'd paid for Margaret's hospital care and promised the boy he'd be back. Lucas's green eyes haunted Jim, not just for their desperation, but for something else, a flicker of familiarity he couldn't place. And then there was Emily. Her quick glances at her phone, her clipped answers, the way she'd tense when he mentioned Lucas, it was subtle, but Jim wasn't blind. The woman he loved was hiding something, and the knot in his gut told him it was tied to the boy. Jim sat at his kitchen island, a cold coffee in hand, replaying the past week. Emily had been home less, claiming late-night client meetings for a big design project. But her sketch pad, usually overflowing with vibrant drawings, lay untouched on the coffee table. Last night, when he'd asked about her day, she'd brushed him off with a tight smile. "Just work, Jim. You know how it is." Then her phone buzzed, and she'd snatched it up, stepping into the bedroom to take the call. He'd heard her voice, low and urgent. "I didn't know he'd find him. What if he figures it out?" The words had lodged in Jim's chest like shrapnel. He wanted to confront her, but doubt gnawed at him. Maybe it was nothing, stress, a demanding client. Emily had never given him reason to distrust her. But those words, "find him," echoed alongside Lucas's face, and Jim's instincts screamed there was a connection. He needed proof, something concrete to quiet the storm in his head. That morning, he drove to the hospital to check on Margaret, Lucas at his side in the Tesla, quiet but clutching a dog-eared comic book. The boy's trust, fragile as it was, felt like a lifeline. "You think Grandma's better?" Lucas asked, his voice small. Jim forced a smile. "We'll find out, kid." At the hospital, Margaret was stable but weak, her face pale against the crisp white sheets. Lucas curled up beside her, reading aloud from his comic, while Jim spoke to the doctor. "She's fighting," the doctor said, "but she needs long-term care." "Does the boy have other family?" Jim hesitated, glancing at Lucas. "Not sure yet. I'm looking into it." The doctor nodded, but her eyes lingered, as if she sensed the weight of unspoken questions. Jim paid another round of bills, his credit card swipe feeling like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Back at the penthouse, Emily was out again. A post-it on the fridge read, "client dinner, don't wait up." "XO?" Jim stared at it, the XO feeling like a mockery. He paced the living room, the city's lights mocking his unease through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then he stopped, his gaze landing on Emily's hairbrush on the bathroom counter. A few strands of her auburn hair clung to the bristles. An idea hit him, reckless but undeniable. He'd heard about DNA tests on a true crime podcast, quick, discreet, definitive. If Lucas's eyes weren't just a coincidence, if Emily was connected to him, this would prove it. Jim moved fast, like he was outrunning his own doubts. He grabbed a plastic bag from the kitchen, carefully plucked a strand of Emily's hair, and sealed it. Then he remembered the hospital. Lucas had sipped a soda through a straw in the waiting room. Jim drove back, heart pounding, and sweet-talked a nurse into letting him grab the straw from the trash. "Lost my keys," he lied, hating the deception but needing the truth. At a private lab in the Loop, he dropped off the samples, paying extra for anonymity and a rush order. 2 days, the technician said. Jim nodded, his throat tight. Those 2 days were torture. Emily was home more, but her warmth felt forced, like she was playing a part. She'd cook breakfast, blueberry pancakes, Jim's favorite, but her eyes darted to her phone every few minutes. "You seem off," Jim said one morning, testing the waters. She laughed, too bright. "Just tired. Big deadline." But when she hugged him, her touch felt distant, like she was already slipping away. At night, Jim lay awake, her soft breathing beside him a cruel reminder of the trust he was losing. The lab results arrived on a gray afternoon. A plain envelope slid under his office door. Jim locked himself in, hands trembling as he tore it open. The words blurred at first, then snapped into focus. Emily Harper and Lucas Bennett, 99.998% biological match. Mother and son. His breath caught, the paper crumpling in his fist. Emily was Lucas's mother. She'd abandoned him, left him to scrape by with a sick grandmother, and said nothing. Worse, She'd let Jim bring Lucas into their home, pretending to care, all while hiding the truth. Rage and betrayal churned in Jim's chest, but so did pain. He loved Emily, had built a future in his mind with her. How could she lie like this? He drove home, the city a smear of lights through his anger. Emily was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, humming softly. She looked up, her smile faltering. "Jim? You okay?" He didn't answer, just held up the lab report, his voice low. "You're his mother. Lucas's mother. And you never told me." Emily froze, the knife clattering to the counter. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked like a stranger. "Jim," she started, but he cut her off. "Don't. You watched me help him, acted like you cared, and all this time, you knew." Tears welled in her eyes, but Jim's heart was too raw for pity. The woman he loved had built their life on a lie, and now, Lucas's green eyes weren't just a memory, they were a call to unravel everything. The silence in the penthouse kitchen was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Jim Carter stood gripping the lab report, its words, Emily Harper and Lucas Bennett, mother and son burning into his mind. Emily, her face pale, stared back, the knife she dropped lying forgotten on the counter. Her eyes, usually warm, were wide with fear and guilt. "Jim, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let me explain." "Explain." Jim's voice was low, raw with betrayal. "You're Lucas's mother. You left him to fend for himself, and you let me bring him here, acting like you didn't know. How do you explain that?" Emily's shoulders slumped, tears spilling down her cheeks. She sank onto a bar stool, hands shaking. "I was 19, she said, barely audible. Pregnant, scared, broke. I thought giving him to my mom was the right thing. I wanted a life, art school, a career. I didn't know she'd get sick. I didn't know he'd end up like that." Jim's chest tightened, torn between rage and the love he still felt. "You knew when I brought him here," he said, stepping closer. "You looked him in the eyes and said nothing. You let me think he was alone." Emily's sob broke the air, but Jim pressed on. "Was I just a mark? Someone to bankroll your guilt?" She shook her head fiercely. "No, Jim. I love you. I saw Lucas with you, and I wanted to be better. For him. For us. But I was terrified you'd hate me." Her words hung between them, fragile and heavy. Jim wanted to believe her, but the lie was a wound too fresh. He turned away, staring at the Chicago skyline, its lights blurring through his anger. Lucas deserved better than this, better than a mother who'd abandoned him, better than a man too blindsided to see the truth. Jim's mind raced. He couldn't undo the past, but he could protect Lucas now. That meant making choices, hard ones, and it started with answers. The next morning, Jim drove to the hospital, leaving Emily curled up on the couch, her eyes red from crying. He needed perspective, someone who knew the whole story. Margaret, Lucas's grandmother, was awake in her hospital bed, her frail hands folded over the blanket. Lucas was at school Jim had enrolled in temporarily, wanting normalcy for the boy. "You knew," Jim said, sitting beside Margaret. "About Emily. Why didn't you tell me?" Margaret's gaze was steady, weathered by years of hardship. "I didn't know you'd care this much," she said softly. "Emily was young, selfish. She thought leaving Lucas with me was freedom. But it broke her too. She sent money when she could, called sometimes, but she couldn't face him. When you showed up, I thought maybe you were his chance." Jim leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "She lied to me, Margaret. To Lucas. How do I trust her now?" Margaret sighed. "You don't. Not yet. But Lucas needs you, not her guilt." Her words settled like stones in Jim's chest. He spent the day with Lucas, taking him to a Cubs game after school. The boy's shy smile as he munched popcorn was a reminder of what mattered. But Jim's resolve hardened. He couldn't let Emily's betrayal slide. Back home, he hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Carla who specialized in family law. "I want to be Lucas's guardian," Jim told her. "Legally. And I need to know my options with Emily." Carla nodded, her pen flying. "We'll start with social services, get temporary custody. As for Emily, if she's cooperative, it's smoother. If not, we'll dig deeper." That night, Jim confronted Emily again. She was packing a suitcase, her movements slow, deliberate. "I'm leaving," she said before he could speak. "I know you can't forgive me." "Not now." Jim crossed his arms, his voice steady. "This isn't about me. It's about Lucas. He needs stability, not your regrets. Are you going to fight me on this?" Emily's eyes met his, raw with pain. "No. He's better off with you. But I want to try to be his mom, someday. If he'll let me." Jim didn't respond. He didn't trust her, Not yet, but her willingness to step back gave him pause. Over the next week, he worked with Carla, filing paperwork for guardianship. Social services visited, impressed by Jim's resources and commitment. Margaret, now recovering, agreed to move in once discharged, creating a stable home for Lucas. But Emily's shadow lingered. Jim found a letter she'd left for Lucas, sealed, with a simple note, "For when he's ready." He tucked it away, unsure if Lucas would ever want to read it. Each step forward was a battle against Jim's own heart. He loved Emily, but her lie had fractured something fundamental. Yet, through the pain, he found clarity. Lucas wasn't just a boy he'd helped. He was a chance to build something real, something honest. Jim wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for a future where Lucas could trust again. And maybe, just maybe, Jim could learn to trust himself. The Chicago wind carried a hint of spring as Jim Carter stood on his penthouse balcony, the city's lights sprawling below like a promise kept. 2 years had passed since the truth about Emily and Lucas shattered his world, and in that time, Jim had rebuilt something stronger, not just for himself, but for Lucas and Margaret. The boy's green eyes, once shadowed by hunger and fear, now sparkled with a quiet confidence. Margaret, fully recovered, tended to herb pots on the balcony, her laughter a steady rhythm in their home. Jim wasn't the man he'd been, driven by deals and doubts. He was a father, a guardian, a man who'd chosen love over anger. After Emily's confession, Jim had moved quickly to secure Lucas's future. With his lawyer, Carla, he navigated the labyrinth of social services, earning temporary custody within weeks. Permanent guardianship followed, a process smoothed by Jim's resources and Margaret's blessing. "You're his family now," she'd said, her voice firm despite her frail frame. Jim converted a guest room into Lucas's own space, painting it blue, Lucas's favorite color, and hanging a Cubs poster above a desk piled with sketchbooks. Margaret moved in, her presence a warm anchor, her stories of old Chicago filling the apartment with life. Emily's departure had been quiet, a shadow slipping out of their world. She left a letter for Lucas, sealed in an envelope Jim kept in a locked drawer. "For when he's ready," she'd written. Jim didn't know if that day would come, but he respected her choice to step back. She'd moved to a small studio in Logan Square, started therapy, and volunteered at a youth shelter, according to a mutual friend. Jim didn't wish her ill. He just couldn't trust her, not after her silence had nearly cost Lucas everything. Yet, he felt a flicker of gratitude. Her betrayal had led him to Lucas, to this new life. The transition wasn't seamless. Lucas, at first, was a ghost in the penthouse, tiptoeing as if afraid he'd be sent away. Nightmares woke him, and he'd clutch Jim's arm, whispering, "You won't leave, right?" Jim would ruffle his hair, voice steady. "I'm here, kid. Always." School was another hurdle. Lucas's education had gaps from years of instability. Jim hired tutors, sat with him over math homework, and cheered when Lucas brought home a B on a science test. "You're killing it," Jim said, ordering pizza to celebrate. Lucas's grin was worth more than any deal Jim had ever closed. Margaret, too, found her place. She taught Lucas to cook her famous apple pie, the kitchen filling with cinnamon and warmth. She'd watch Jim with a knowing smile, as if she saw the boy he'd been. Lonely, guarded, building walls to keep the world out. "You're a good man," she'd say, handing him a mug of tea. Jim would shrug, but her words chipped away at his old insecurities. He wasn't just a millionaire anymore. He was someone who showed up, day after day, for the people who needed him. Life settled into a rhythm. Jim coached Lucas's Little League team, shouting encouragement from the sidelines as Lucas swung at pitches. Weekends were for museum trips or fishing on Lake Michigan, Lucas's laughter echoing over the water. Jim traded late-night emails for bedtime stories, reading Harry Potter with voices that made Lucas giggle. His phone, once glued to his hand, now stayed on the counter, ignored. Work still mattered, but it no longer defined him. Lucas and Margaret did. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, the city glowing below, Lucas asked, "Jim, what if I mess up someday? Will you still want me?" His voice was small, his eyes searching. Jim set down his coffee, kneeling to meet Lucas's gaze. "You're my kid, Lucas. Mess up, and we'll fix it together. Always." Lucas nodded, leaning into Jim's shoulder, and for the first time, Jim felt whole, not because of money or success, but because he'd built a family, one choice at a time. Emily sent a birthday card for Lucas's 12th birthday, her handwriting shaky but hopeful. Lucas stared at it, unopened, then handed it to Jim. "Keep it," he said. "Maybe later." Jim nodded, respecting his pace. Justice, he'd learned, wasn't about revenge. It was about giving Lucas the space to heal, the stability to grow. Emily was trying in her way, but Lucas's trust was Jim's to nurture, not hers to claim. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret joined them, a knitted blanket over her knees. "Look at us," she said, her voice warm. "A proper family." Jim smiled, his heart full. He'd once feared love was a transaction, a deal to be brokered. Now, he knew better. Love was showing up, even when it hurt, even when it scared you. Lucas wasn't just a boy he'd saved, he was the son who'd saved him, too.